They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Robert Lawrence Binion wrote his poem, For the Fallen, in September of 1914, mere weeks into the First World War. His words, as profound today as the day they were written. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the end of that war. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, people will stop and bow their heads and pay tribute to the centenary of when the guns fell silent. The honor roll that hangs in this church bears the names of local men who enlisted in the First and Second World Wars. Not all of them came home. This year, we pay tribute to a Second World War veteran that was born just days after the world felt peace a century ago. William Bryce Taylor was born November 15, 1918, to parents Peter and Catherine. He was the oldest of 5 children and grew up in the foothills of the Moose Mountains at the famed Dune Lodge stock farm.
I'm Errol Young, and Bryce Taylor is my uncle. He's my mother's older brother. I really don't know a whole lot about my Uncle Bryce. He wasn't really talked about much. I know they worked hard on that farm, and he took his grade 12 in Brandon.
Following his graduation in 1937, Bryce returned to Dune Lodge to farm. His time back home was cut short, though, with war erupting in Europe in 1939. Bryce did like many other local boys and answered the call of duty.
I just think times were tough back then, and there wasn't many jobs, but I really don't know why he joined that.
On July 10th, 1940, 22-year-old Bryce signed an attestation paper with the Royal Canadian Air Force. 2 days later, on July 12th, he swore an oath to be faithful to His Majesty the King. That pledge would eventually take him into the cockpit of a Halifax bomber, number JD-159. Before his career as a flight engineer began, he was one of the many souls involved in the mobilization of the Royal Canadian Air Force. To better understand what Bryce's ascensions through the ranks would have been like, I visited the site of a World War II air training facility.
My name is Jeff Bell, and I'm the Harvard lead pilot here at the Commonwealth Air Training Plan Museum in Brandon, Manitoba. So the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, I believe it was 130,000 aircrew were trained in Canada during that time. A lot of it was based on their past education, their skills and abilities. They would put them in a trainer that was called a link trainer, which is a very, very preliminary type of flight simulator to see what their level of coordination was. There was quite a process with it. But if you didn't make pilot, then they would often end up being observers or navigators or air gunners or wireless operators, that sort of thing. Probably a student at the time, from 1939 to 1945 would have started flying a Tiger Moth. And then from the Tiger Moth, they would have moved into an airplane like the Harvard. And then from there, they would have gone into something like a multi-engine, like an Avro Anson or a Cessna Crane or something like that. So in order to get onto a bomber, they would have had to have gone through those steps. But they were all obviously pretty young guys.
Bryce was a natural. Having worked at Ed Hanna's garage and service station, his mechanical experience made him an asset. He went on to become a flight engineer, the one who assisted the pilot in keeping the plane mechanically sound in flight. His position in the plane would have been in the cockpit. While serving overseas, his mind was often of home. He wrote many letters to his loved ones.
I have a few letters that he sent home to family, but they really don't say a whole lot about his time. It just talks about what they did socially. He was mostly inquiring about what was going on back home and getting the gossip and who was visiting Dune Lodge. It was interesting how he was always wanting to know what the girls were doing at home, like his sisters. In most of his letters, he's always mentioning how much mail and how many parcels he's got, but apologized for not answering them. These are his letters.
These are all letters. Yeah.
And then, the ones from Ontario are on paper, and then there's the airmail. At one point, he mentions in there, I wish it was over.
Over the course of his war, Bryce successfully completed 25 missions against the enemy and was the best flight engineer in the 419th Squadron. This was an incredible feat, given that the average lifespan of a Royal Canadian Air Force crew was measured in days.
It wouldn't take much of a hit. One bullet could bring an airplane down quite easily.
On the night of July 3rd, 1943, Bryce and his crew of 8 took off on a mission to bomb targets near Cologne, Germany. The plane was shot down by a night fighter, disintegrated in the air, and crashed into flames into an open field. It was 100% destroyed. 4 men were observed to have bailed out, but Bryce went down with the aircraft. Flying over the abandoned airbase at Rivers, Manitoba on a calm day, I think of Bryce and his crew, knowing that they were going down. I imagine what those final moments must have been like.
Imagine pretty terrifying. Yeah, depending on how much time they had and that sort of thing. They would have obviously loaded the airplane with the equipment that they need to load on it, so it would have had a full weapons load and a full bomb load. They would have had a parachute at best.
Dear Mrs. Taylor, you have no doubt already been informed that your son is missing after operations on the night of July 3rd, 1943. Your son's plane failed to return and its loss can only be attributed to enemy action. May I convey my sincere sympathy in your great loss and express the hope that better news may follow.
Bryce had plans to have a drink with a friend when he returned from the mission.
And they were to meet that night and at the officers' lounge, I think they called it the Beavers Club, and Bryce didn't show up, and that's when he was killed.
The Royal Canadian Air Force Casualties Officer has advised me that a report has been received, quoting official German information, which confirms that your son was buried on July 5th, 1943 in the military cemetery, grave number 8, Antwerp, Belgium. May I offer my deepest sympathy.
He's buried in Belgium, and there's a cemetery there. We've got pictures of it, but I don't believe anybody has ever gone there. I have pictures of him in his uniform. Wow, I feel sad that they had to go through that, and I'm sad that I don't know more about him. He was a valuable part of the war effort.
For her loss, Mrs. Taylor received a Silver Cross. Now empty, the box it came in is a reminder to so many things that have been lost to time.
No, they didn't talk about it. No, they didn't. Do you think back then people, if they didn't talk about death, it was easier? I don't know.
This suitcase was the only thing of Bryce's to return to his beloved home at Dune Lodge. Now in the care of his niece, it once held what was left of his possessions.
I only have his suitcase that his belongings were sent home in, and it was always kind of special to me. It was empty when I got it, but I think how sad. First you find out your son is killed, and then you get the suitcase arriving, and then you know he's buried in Belgium and you'll never see his grave.